What's up, guys? Chris here from Mainely Mesh. Welcome to the Epic Hawk prequel overview video. So this is quite possibly my favorite head release since I've been running Mainely Mesh. So this is an incredible new option from Epic Lacrosse, and although I don't want to overhype it by any means, it's a very special product. Basically, Epic really dug into the three most important components of a head as far as dimensions go. There's kind of three magical numbers that really dictate the way a head feels in your hand, and combine them to create this hybrid laid-back profile plus a kind of standard offset head, which gave us the Prequel. So if you haven't really followed the whole prequel sequel Hawk thing, the original Hawk that came out 4 years ago now, I believe, was essentially supposed to be, in Epic's mind, kind of the future of heads, right? So the Hawk was the first time everybody was asking for these high pockets, but if you put a high pocket in a standard offset head, it would whip into the ground. And so Epic wanted to create this head that was both catered to a high pocket while still having the functionality of your classic mid pocket. And they spent a lot of time working with Flip Nomberg, who's one of my big idols in the industry. He runs Rocket Pocket Lacrosse, started the Vail Shootout, really incredible guy. And they worked with him a lot, and he really believes that the pocket should sit in the middle of the head. And they kind of created this funky new laid-back profile that allowed you to achieve a higher pocket without having too much whip. And that was because they changed what they're calling the lie of the head. So in order to understand what the lie of a head is, you have to understand that the one constant of a head, and a lot of times you see pictures of a head not connected to a shaft, the one constant dimension here that Epic is labeling is the center axis of a shaft. So essentially, if you were to run a string, a metal rod straight down the middle center part of this shaft and extended it out through the throat, and then looked at how far from that center axis this tip of the scoop lies, that is what they're defining as a lie. So if we crank this tip back further, and if you guys remember the Maverick metric, which was really hard to string with a lot of whip, that's because the lie of that head was very extreme. That laid back profile, what it does in order to achieve the lesser whip while still having a high pocket, is it cranks that lie up a little bit more. So I believe the lie of the Hawk sequel is about 0.9 inches, while on the Prequel it is 0.75-ish. So the greater the lie is, the greater the distance from the tip of the scoop to the center axis of the shaft, the less whip a head will have in general. Obviously, there's some things you can do to tweak the way, the amount of whip that a stick has. And if you essentially think of it in terms of lie, if you crank up these top nylons, you're essentially decreasing the pocket lie of your stick, thus creating more hook and more whip. The second important thing this was back to the sequel prequel thing. So the Hawk was the original head that did something kind of funky. The sequel was obviously the sequel to the Hawk. It was the next version of the Hawk. They tried to fix some things, some issues that the Hawk had, made the head, a little bit easier to string, a little bit more catered towards a legal pocket instead of having that kind of curvature to the bottom side rail that made the original Hawk pocket illegal a lot of the times. And then the Prequel is supposed to be the head that precedes both of those, right? It's your traditional offset, something a little bit more standard and less of a jump on the market. And that was one of the biggest issues we had with the sequel, was trying to say, look, if you're choosing between an optic and a sequel, there's a huge difference there as far as the whip spectrum, the lie, the sweet spot, all these things that Epic has just defined. So now this is kind of the head that really transitions you from your your standard traditional offset to the modern laid-back profile that the sequel has. The second key category that Epic really focused on here was something they call the sweet spot. So the sweet spot of the head is something we've talked about a lot in our stringings, which is the lowest point of the bottom side rail, or also known as the vertex of the bottom side rail, right where the bottom side rail stops curving down and starts curving back up towards the scoop. That kind of lowest point of the stick is where the ball is going to naturally sit when you're holding it horizontally, and that's really the sweet spot of the head. So From there, what that allows us to do is create an even deeper feeling pocket, because you are limited to having this 2-inch width of the head, so I can't have this massive plastic block of on the sidewall, but you aren't necessarily restricted on as much as the offset, how deep you can get that offset. So if you can kind of crank up the sweet spot, obviously there is a certain rule, I actually don't know the true dimension, but if you can kind of crank up that sweet spot so it sits right in the middle of the head and sits as low as possible. So I believe on the Prequel it's like a little bit over 2 inches. Oh, Derek's got the stat for me on the sweet spot. So on the Prequel it's 2.027 inches below the center axis of the shaft, whereas on the Sequel it's actually 1.543 inches. So the Sequel won't feel like it has as deep of a pocket, and that's because it wants to sit that pocket up a little bit higher, whereas the Prequel is going to feel about as deep of a pocket as you could possibly get. The final characteristic is if you kind of tweak the lie and the sweet spot, you can affect the travel time of the ball through the stick. So the travel is what Epoch is defining as the distance between the sweet spot of the stick and the lie of the scoop. So from the vertex of the bottom side rail up to the scoop, that distance is technically how far the ball will travel in the pocket. On one of our Instagram posts, I kind of talked about the pocket lie, which is essentially, you know, you can tweak obviously little things within the stringing of the stick so that the ball might have a longer trajectory through the pocket, but overall the tendency of the head can be defined, you know, whether it has more whip, whether it has a quicker release or a slower release, can be defined as the distance from the sweet spot to the lie. And what's interesting, most interesting about this for me is I love a head like the Maverick Optic. And part of what I like about the Maverick Optic U is that it has this smooth release and this long release. So I believe the travel on the Optic is actually more about 7 inches, whereas on the travel for the Hawk Prequel, I believe it's about 5.5 inches. And ignoring everything else, this means you will get a quicker release. Whether a quicker release is something that's going to improve your game is a different question. I think it's one of those things where it's kind of like shot speed, where the difference between shooting 90 miles an hour and 95 miles an hour might not translate to a bunch more goals a year, but depending on your style of play, it might be something that you're looking to improve. So say you're a crease guy and you need the ball in and out of your stick a lot faster, then maybe you don't want this super low pocket with a super long travel, and you want something with a little bit less travel. And the travel is even less for the Sequel than it is for the Prequel, because the Prequel here is sitting more in the middle of the head, whereas for the Sequel it's sitting a little bit higher up. I believe, let me see if they have the stat on their Instagram. I believe the travel time for the Prequel is more in like the 4-inch range. I don't have it right now. Oh, yes, I do. So the travel for the Prequel is exactly 4.98 inches, whereas for the Prequel, it's more like 5.59. So it's not a huge difference, but you will get a slightly quicker release for the Sequel compared to the Prequel, and also a pretty significantly quicker release from the Prequel compared to another head. And that's really the biggest thing that I noticed when I first threw with the Prequel, is that the ball comes out of it more quickly. And I made this crazy noise on the field when I first passed with it, because it's something that just feels funky. It goes exactly where I want it to go, throws the same way, but has a quicker release. And that's because Epoch spent so much time really dialing in where the sweet spot is and the relationship between the location of the sweet spot and the lie of the head. If you really maximize those numbers, it allows you to get the quickest release possible while still having a deep feeling pocket and still having this kind of traditional offset head. So, if that's a lot of information, don't worry, I'm gonna be beating it into your heads, not just talking about the Prequel and the Sequel, but also about all of these other heads, because it really just sets up a definition for things that we've been talking about at Mainly Mesh for a long time and have really influenced the way we string our sticks. So I couldn't be more excited about this head. It also features a year warranty. It's made in the US per usual. I don't have the correct weight right now. I believe it's around 4.75, 4.8 ounces. I'm gonna double check once we get our full shipment in, but it's an incredible product. Huge props to Epoch for creating this bird of prey, as they would say. So thanks so much, guys. The Prequel releases tomorrow, or July 14th, or today's the 14th. What day is it today? Today's the 14th. It releases July 15th. So make sure you check out our website at midnight of the 14th going into the 15th or anytime after that to snag your Hawk prequel, whether you want it unstrung or strung. I have a really awesome pattern for it that I will be sharing with you guys in the upcoming week. But thanks so much. Make sure you guys subscribe. Click the link in the bio down below to buy once it hits the 15th. So if you guys are watching this on the 14th, I'm sorry it's not available for purchase yet. But click that link down below. Thanks so much. I will catch you guys next time.